It's the Agorist Next podcast. I'm Brandon. I've got my great co-host Dag with me. How you doing, Dag?
I'm doing spectacular, man. How's it going?
Hey, it's going great. So we don't have any guests on this time. I thought that South Park could do a COVID special. We could too. But we're also going to talk about things that you won't usually hear in other podcasts, and I think we've got a really good show prepared for you guys. So with that said, I want to start out with the end game of COVID, right? And I don't think COVID is the end game, but I think COVID will lead us down the road to the end game. But what do you think, Dag?
I like what you said there, and I think it's funny. Like almost anything that happens, like I don't necessarily think it starts off as like a psyop, but it definitely turns into a psyop. Like they're going to take that opportunity to use whatever they can. And I also think it's funny. I just noticed that our first episode together, we went for about an hour about COVID, and that was back in what was that, May? And this is still going on, so I guess it warrants another episode.
Yeah, it's crazy. Absolutely. Yeah, and a little disclaimer, like we're not doctors. We don't try to be.
Definitely not.
And we'll kind of go down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but the thing is like I'm not saying that these it's like, we're not saying that these politicians are like lizard people or anything. But we're also not.
It wouldn't surprise me in the least if they were. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly. We're not ruling it out. So I think as anarchists, we're a little bit more open-minded than your regular person.
There's a saying I like, and I don't remember who said it, so I'm going to not be able to misattribute it. But it was something along the lines of never attribute to malice what could be chalked up to incompetence. So I think that's something I try to keep in mind a lot of times when I'm talking about politicians and stuff, but obviously there in a lot of this stuff there is some sort of higher agenda that is probably evil. So it's trying to find that balance of what's true and what's just politicians just wanting to get voted in and wanting to give money to their friends, and then of course there's people with higher, more evil agendas on top of that too. So it's trying to hash all that out can be tough.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get started with the end game here. My thoughts on, an end game for this, and we're just kind of throwing around ideas here, but I think in the end, I think they want martial law. And that's because with martial law, you don't have to necessarily follow the Constitution. I don't know the exact legal stuff on, declaring martial law, but I know that there's a lot of things that they can do that they wouldn't ordinarily do, and it gives them a lot of power, and that way they can have more military on the streets, and police and military can get away with more things, and in essence they gain more power. So I think in the end game they want martial law, right? They want.
I believe that martial law is the definition is somewhere along the lines of it's. I think it's both like military rule, and I think that actually it is suspension of the Constitution. I think actually is part of it in the definition there. So What do you achieve with suspension of the Constitution? All those tyrants' wildest dreams can come true.
Yeah, and you can achieve anything you want. So
right.
I think their problem is like how. And I'm glad you clarified that. I was thinking it was, but I'm glad you clarified. And the thing too is like, how do they achieve it? I guess, and I think there's more than just martial law that they want. But I think once they get martial law, then they can achieve. It's just dominoes from that. They can pretty much enslave us. Once they achieve martial law, they can just pretty much enslave us. So I think the end game is pretty much martial law. But I think the question is how do they achieve martial? And I guess
now,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, because I wonder that as well. Then I wonder how effective can it be to achieve and then hold it throughout like the entire country? Obviously the United States is a big place. Do you think that this would most likely be something that would largely affect cities? I just don't think they have the manpower to take over rural areas. But then again, I guess if you control cities, you have a lot of ways of controlling the rural areas, just because if you can control, the money and transportation and, supply lines and stuff like that, you really could have a lot of power over them, even without boots on the ground, So I guess I'm not sure. Are they maybe do we have some sort of balkanization thing coming? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? I mean,
how effective it may or not be in what areas.
Each state has a pretty well man National Guard. So, I mean, with that, they could do quite a bit. I mean, they could take control over lots of stuff very
And even if it's
quickly.
just cities, that's half the population. I mean, that's a lot of people.
Right. Yeah, yeah. If they just do cities, I mean, and it's almost kind of like like many of these larger cities in the U.S., especially if you have very densely populated areas like New York City and L.A. Kind of all roads almost lead to those large, almost like all roads lead to Rome. Kind of, all roads kind of lead to these bigger cities because they're so densely populated. That's where you have agricultural stuff flowing into the cities, and once you control the cities and you control all the transportation and yeah, exactly, all the roads and transportation into the cities, there's not much that anybody else can really do about that. But how do they achieve that? And you look at 9/11, what happened with 9/11. Now, we're not going to go into 9/11, but I mean, there's definitely some holes there. Like, everything on the plane burned except for these terrorist passports, right? I don't know how that happens, but, or, Building 7 went down all by itself. I'm not like I do have to say that I am, kind of open-minded there. So, but,
Building 7's what gets me. That's the one that's hard to explain, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, what did they do with 9/11? Fear. Fear with smallpox, fear with terrorists, fear with the Middle East, fear with, Saddam Hussein and weapons of mass destruction, and on and on and on. And, COVID's the same thing, fear. So, how are they going to achieve martial law? Well, I think looking at past events, I think, fear, and fear is kind of the best way you can control people. And I think maybe they'll do some kind of like false flag event, or some kind of nuclear disaster or something of that matter. Maybe they'll even blow up a city and blame it on terrorists. Who knows? Or another country, and then be like, okay, there's so much chaos now. Of course, the state causes the chaos, right? It's not anarchy. But then they can go in and be like, okay, we need to save the day with martial law. And, if you scare people enough, and we've seen it work, we've seen people be so scared that they close down their businesses for COVID, while some people don't want to. A lot of people did. And so I think fear, getting to that point, fear will...
Yeah, they're kind of priming the pump for, it to be a China thing or a Russia thing. But even with all the riots and everything that are going on, I mean, they really don't even need a foreign power to create enough chaos. I mean, they've got enough of that going on in certain places to where, they're talking about sending in federal troops. Or you've had the... what were they? Was it Homeland Security or Border Patrol guys in Portland who were there, disappearing people?
Yeah, it was like they were like some federal agents that nobody knew exactly what, federal agency they were from. It was just like, we're federal agents. We don't have to declare ourselves or tell you exactly who we work for. We're just federal agents. And it was like
hold over from the 9/11 days that they got all those extra powers. To be able to go and do things like that. So, do you think that 9/11 something like a cow that kind of stopped giving milk? Do you think that they sort of had this plan, or do you think maybe it just wasn't being as effective anymore? But I definitely think that this is something to have us willingly or even beg, to have more rights taken away.
Yeah.
So with everything that's happened so far, do you think that this is more part of the plan, or do you think that this has been some sort of test to sort of see what they can get away with and how people will respond?
Yeah, absolutely a test. And that kind of leads me into another thing I wanted to talk about was that what does this accomplish with what does COVID accomplish? Now, I've heard a couple of these big guys talk about it, like Jeff Berwick and some of the other ones, and I think the first thing that went through my mind when this happened was, me personally, and this was before I even heard anybody else talk about it, but me personally, the first thing that went through my head was, oh man, now they've got something that they can blame an economic collapse on. Because I've been waiting for an economic collapse for a while. I mean, if you go through it, this has been the longest bull run in American history. I mean, of course, it's not a free market. With a free market, we would have more stable economy, more stable bull runs and quieter busts and stuff like that. But you still have boom and busts in a completely free market, but it wouldn't be so drastic. And your boom markets would be, they'd probably last a lot longer. But anyways, this 10-year period has been the longest bull run in American history. Also, the stock market is higher than it's ever. The repo market there's a lot of repos and stuff last year around this time, actually. So there's that. And then also the bond market, you had a inverted, the inverted yield curve. I think when this happens, when you have an inverted yield curve and like 2-year bonds are, cheaper than having 10-year, or 2-year bonds give you more gains than 10-year bonds, something's wrong with the economy. And whenever that happens, you always have an economic collapse. So in my mind, there's all of these economic indicators leading up to this COVID thing, and all of a sudden COVID happens. And whether they, I don't want to debate whether it was, government caused or whatnot, but in my eyes, they obviously took advantage of it. And yeah, I think this COVID kind of, well, and they saw it coming. They saw it in China, so it took a little while for it to come to the States. And I think the U.S. government said, well, I think they were kind of exploring options. What can we do with this thing, right? And because if anybody's the biggest opportunist, it's government. And,
especially when it comes to tragedies.
Yeah, tragedy and fear. Yeah, absolutely. How can we make this thing, super scary so we can obtain more power, control the people? And what does this all do? So I think that it gives them an excuse for an economic collapse. I think that Jeremiah Harding actually said this one, that it allows them to test their control nets. How much they can, when they say XYZ, how many people follow and listen to this, and they can kind of test that out. And I don't even think that they thought that they had as much control as they did. I didn't think that I didn't even think that they had this much control myself.
I am a little disappointed. My fellow humans, for so many of them, and people that I know personally who I know are intelligent people, who have just, fallen for this thing, so hard. And it's disturbing, and it's upsetting, really, because, it's like, I get really upset at the media, to use a generic term there, just because I see what they're doing to some people and how much stress they're putting people through, and how much they're not necessarily blatantly lying in some instances, but they're not being truthful. They might be being factual, but not truthful in a lot of their reporting and stuff. And yeah, it's really disturbing. And I got to say that it definitely seems like they're getting away with a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, who has a right to tell you to close down your own business and shit? Like,
right.
Yeah. Who has a right to tell me I can't sell XYZ to Joe? Like, there's a flu. You can't do that. And it's yeah, you're exactly right. I think it has been a little disturbing to me too that people would just willy-nilly, okay, we'll do whatever you say. But there have been people who say, no, I don't want to close down my business. But then the government goes in and shuts them down. And again, I'm not saying that this economic collapse was due to COVID, because I don't believe that. I believe that the economic collapse is due to the government response of an
almost like they were trying to get one last good. I can't believe I can keep going to this milking term or analogy today, but it's like they're trying to get one last good milking out of this financial system. They gave billions of dollars to their cronies. Printed a ton of money. Are they just trying to get one last hurrah out of this before it collapses or something?
Right. Yeah. It's definitely disturbing, but it, because of it, I think it's so we've got an excuse now economically. We've got control nets, just control. It gives them just control in general. We can tell you.
Yeah, down to just everything. Everybody, people's behavior. I don't know how it is by you, but we've got arrows on the floor of grocery stores here, and it's like you're supposed to follow this maze, and I've seen people not at the grocery stores or anything, but people ridicule people for not following. How stupid are you? You can't even follow the arrows on the ground. And I'm kind of like, how stupid are you that you follow the arrows on the ground? It's upsetting. And again, these are intelligent people.
It's like, what kind of Stockholm syndrome do you have to be able to just be like, okay, like, oh,
like a dope. And one thing while we're talking about that I think is so ridiculous about a lot of these policies, like the one-way aisles, or at Walmart, for instance, they only have one entrance open. It's almost like they're forcing people to walk closer to each other in some of these circumstances. Like, if you want to get in and out of the grocery store, you're going to go in, you're going to get all your items and get out. But when you have to walk up and down every aisle, it's like you have to spend twice as much time in the store if you're actually going to obey those rules. And It just seems so backwards to me, but it gives an appearance of safety. And I think that's what, I think that sometimes it's what some of this is. It's like an appearance, we want to look like we're, making things safer. But at the same time, it's a really grand experiment to see who's going to follow these rules and how far people might actually go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it kind of reminds me, you saying that kind of reminds me of the duck and cover. uh,
Yeah.
Getting under your desk during a nuclear explosion is not going to protect you, but it just made you feel more safe that you, quote unquote, knew what to do. and
right, you're doing something. Yeah. You feel like you have a say in the matter.
Yeah, like it's gonna like protect you or something. But yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up. Another thing too is like when they do force you to close your business, I mean, then you're like dependent on them, right? Like, and I think the government kind of wants dependency too. Like,
yeah, they absolutely do. Them and their the corporatist cronies, because that's how they how they control you, how they can sell stuff to you. That's kind of what the public school system's been doing for the last 150 years, is trying to give you some sort of learned helplessness. And yeah, I mean, people, you make people feel dependent, and they and in their mind, it's not control, but they're begging for daddy to come save them. But of course, that is control.
Yeah, you're right. And I didn't think of it like that. It is kind of another form of control. And, the thing too is like, do you want government to go away if you need them to survive?
Right.
How many people are going to be like, oh, this entity that I need to live, how many people are going to say, I want it gone tomorrow? If everyone needs it to live, then they're not going to go away. And, that's another box that this checks is I think dependency. And I don't know if you had anything to add on that.
Well, it's that kind of leads into like UBI, which we've talked about with this COVID thing in the past, and they're doing the Trump buck checks, etc. It's almost like this would be a way to get into some sort of like UBI kind of scenario. Krugman of all people was saying that he had a tweet. I don't remember exactly what it said offhand, but it was something to the point of like, with the lockdowns can go on, it's just fine. We just need to keep sending people stimulus money, and then everything will be good. But that completely ignores supply lines and how supply works. You can't just shut places down and expect to have stuff in the stores to spend the printed money on, in the first place. But people, the general public, a lot of people I talk to, they do have that sense that it's like there's just this pile of resources government can just give us and we'll be fine and we can live. I think that's definitely not the case, but this definitely sets us up for some sort of UBI kind of scenario.
Yeah, I think so too. And that brings up another good point is like you can close down, I think that they're trading production for a printing press, and that's also going to help collapse the dollar, which I think in turn will, then the government can go, well, I know this COVID thing messed up the dollar, but we're going to save you with like a new digital crypto dollar, so then they'll have even more, and then once they have a digital crypto dollar, then they could say, okay, our UBI and our food stamps and welfare, whatever programs they want are going to be tied to that thing. So then they'll be able to track, trace, and automatically tax each and every transaction that you make. And there will be no way at that point to be able to escape or get out of taxes.
Yeah, I mean, we can recheck our control and dependency boxes with with something like a digital dollar, because they can control what you're allowed to spend your money on, who's allowed to get the dough, and things of that nature. If you don't have your social credit score, you didn't get whatever vaccine or what have you, they have a lot of control over you there too. So yeah, that's definitely scary.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the vaccine part, because this leads us to, of course, government's in bed with big pharma. So, I mean, what does COVID give them in terms of, medicine? It gives them more control over medicine. People think that government's more legitimate in terms of medicine than ever before, probably because they've got the World Health Organization and the CDC saying exactly what they want. And, this leads me to, so I think it was back in like April or May, Canada was saying, okay, all Canadian citizens must return home, or else you will lose your medical care. And of course, we know that Canada has free medical care. So it's just funny how they use something that you've already paid into, something that you already have and have paid into. It's funny how that they use that as they can use that for whatever scenario they want. Then they have even more control over it. They're going to
Yeah,
say,
I actually heard somebody say recently, and I never can attribute this stuff to whoever said it, so sorry about that, whoever said this. But they were saying that like they're talking about like your private health insurance company might even be able to tie the vaccine. If you want to keep health insurance with them, you need to get this vaccine. And of course, we know when we say private, there's air quotes there because with the amount of control that the government has over the medical industry, there's not really such thing as an absolute private healthcare company anymore. If the government wants them to require that, they will require that. So, trying to find one that doesn't is tough. But that's scary to me because, I have health insurance. I have medical issues that I need it for. Like I have like cardiological issues. Like I'm going to need surgery for. Like I will not be able to afford without, some sort of health insurance. So, that's really scary to me because as much as I want to be like, I'm not taking no vaccine, if it comes down to either you take the vaccine or you don't get your heart valve, that's a really tough decision. Obviously I want my heart valve, but then I have to like trust this vaccine, which I don't. So it can put a lot of us in really tough situations for sure. That's scary. That's what, they're doing up there in Canada. But one more reason that socialized medicine is terrifying to me.
yeah, absolutely. It's very terrifying. I mean, it's like, I think you're right. They could say do this or else, and or else we'll take away this other thing. What they're going to do is they're going to eventually say, okay, well, we don't want COVID to spread, or we don't want people to die from COVID, or maybe whatever virus in the future. You have to take this vaccine, or else you won't be able to work. And
right.
And at that point, it's like, well, everyone has to get the vaccine, and of course, big pharma is going to make, trillions of dollars.
Oh yeah, and even the ones who aren't going to come out with a vaccine, they've already been given a ton of money to do the work. Like this whole Project Warp Speed or whatever comical name Trump's given it. But yeah, I mean they're already giving like a lot of money to these pharmaceutical companies. So even if they aren't successful, they're already getting a ton of dough out of this. And yes, this is guaranteed customers. I have no idea if this is factually accurate, but I feel like this probably would be the most distributed vaccine, like in the world. I mean, maybe even ever. Yeah, polio vaccine's been around for a long time and stuff, and they're still doing that. And I don't think they do smallpox vaccines anymore because it was pretty much eradicated. But just and I mean, let's be real, guys. This is a spicy cold. Like it does not warrant this kind of fear. It does not warrant that kind of mass vaccination. It just doesn't.
Yeah, I mean the deaths. I mean the amount of deaths, and you know what? Whether you think the death numbers are right or wrong or whatever, I mean we know that they're somewhat padded. I mean the numbers are somewhat padded because there there have been deaths that have been recorded that were actually car accidents. We know that.
Yeah, we talked about that last week with John, that motorcycle accident here in Florida. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing too that I want to touch on was that the thing about vaccines is I can't say that I'm like an anti-vaxxer or anything, but I can't. Me personally, I don't like it when and this is kind of like for me, it's like every product. Okay, any product that I take that I cannot sue you if it harms me, I have a problem. And vaccines, it's like if it does paralyze you, if it does harm you in any way, shape, or form, in the U.S., I don't know about other countries. If any of these vaccines do harm you, you cannot sue them for it. So, and the thing
right.
too, yeah, no, go ahead.
You can't sue the manufacturers, but they do have the vaccine injury court, which then taxpayers fund the compensation, and that does exist. And I believe that if you win one of those, you're not allowed to talk about it. So
yeah, they make you sign like a non. They make you sign like a non-disclosure agreement or something.
That's just like obviously suspicious. That's what bugs me when people are just so anything you're not allowed to question bugs me, and that's one of them is the vaccines. And
yeah,
like, they're proven safe and effective, and obviously you don't know the story behind them if you think that's true.
yeah, obviously, if they're not allowed to talk about it after they've won, I mean, how many of these do we not know about? And the thing too is like, how can the CDC or the World Health Organization or the government or whoever, how can they medically say that one blanket, one size fits all for every single person? One vaccine is good for every single person. I don't think that one anything is good for anybody. Well, is good for everybody. Like, you know, are we going to sit here and say peanuts are good for everybody, or ice cream's good for everybody? Or, I think people with diabetes or peanut allergies would disagree. So, I mean, we're all different. So, I mean, how can they say that one blanket and one size fits all? I have a problem. I have an issue with that too. So,
yeah, I agree with you. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but I think that if you just inject yourself or your children with something just because the AMA says that you should, I think you should do some research. That's all, because not everything I think is a necessity. I think kind of got to weigh your options on those regards.
I think that if we had a truly free market, and I say truly because we've never, in the history of man, I don't think that we've ever really had a free market anywhere. But if we ever really had a truly free market, that then I think maybe, and I say maybe, market for vaccinations would actually be, maybe there would be, somewhat beneficial, a beneficial market to, vaccinations.
Right, if we actually had competition,
Yeah, well, yeah, not only competition, but yeah, well, definitely competition, but without like government control to lobbyists and the medical industry is just completely.
Oh yeah, we could do 18 shows on that alone.
Right, but to get off, vaccines and pharma, I think, what we've covered so far is that this gives them, which boxes does this check, right? It tests, their test nets. It checks control, dependency,
money for cronies.
UBI.
I think something else is a really good
economic
point on all this
excuse.
Too is,
yeah, go ahead.
Yes, the economic excuses. What this does to general discord among citizens, even like families and stuff. So basically, this is kind of teaching half the people to be terrified of the other half of people. That they're super spreaders, and you're gonna give us diseases, and you're gonna kill my grandma, and you're gonna kill my family by not masking up or social distancing or taking this seriously or whatever the excuse may be. But it's definitely sowing a lot of discord between people. Not just like, oh, I don't like your politics. It's you're gonna fucking kill me, with this disease, and that's something that gets people very, very reared up. And then they make it very obvious to pick out who's who in public by who's wearing masks or who's not too. So it's it's just very open like that. And then what is this also going to do to divide up families, because they're going to look at ways to, just another reason for CPS to take a child out of the home, if they feel like the parents aren't handling this properly. What's this doing to kids having, going to school and everything. I think that's really disturbing when I see what they're trying to put kids through, going to schools. And I don't know how parents could send their kids to government schools after all this. Like, it seems like the best time to opt out of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's another benefit that it gives government is it gives them, it increases, in my opinion, it increases indoctrination, and it makes them even more like obedient, follow our directions or else type.
And really, if you look at any like the PolitiFact, which of course PolitiFact is garbage, but if you look at any like the PolitiFact checks on a lot of this stuff, yeah, they say like, oh well, like I think it's all about like hydrochloroquine, like, oh, is it a good? They're like, no, that's pants on fire false. It's not a treatment. And their reasoning is because the CDC says it's not. Like, that's their reasoning for any of their stuff as well. It's just the CDC says it is, or the USDA says it is, or it isn't. It's like, well, that's not any sort of proof one way or the other, or even evidence. That's just, that's what the government says, so that means it must be absolutely true. You need to read some history.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I want to touch on what you had kind of said earlier, where like people are like, oh, well, if you sneeze or something, it kill me. I just automatically don't like people now. I think you're absolutely right. Me personally, I went to the grocery store. I think there's like 4 or 5 people around me, and I didn't want to sneeze in my mask, right? Because then I don't know, just you get all this stuff.
Because it's gross.
Yeah, I mean, it's just and I'd have like boogers on, who knows, like phlegm on my
Right.
face, and so like I tried to sneeze into my what is it, like my elbow or whatever, and like not a single person, not a single one of them was like, "Oh, bless you," like what would have happened. And I guarantee you that a year ago, at least one of them would have been like, "Oh, bless you," or a couple of them. But every single one of those five people that were around me just kind of gave me a dirty look, and it's like it's almost like a great way to turn everybody against each other. And I think the masks too. I mean, when you see somebody with a mask on, you don't necessarily see all of their expressions, their human features. It's kind of like you're making everybody look like a drone, so that you have like less empathy or less humanity towards everybody else. And I think that's something too that it kind of helps to divide us and not want to take care of each other. And
It really does. I mean, typically when you walk by somebody in public, what is a smile and a nod, right? I'm from the South. I lived in Wisconsin for a short period. People told me how weird it was that like I waved at strangers, but at any rate, we smile and nod at people, and that's just not happening. And if you do like make eye contact with people, it's almost like people are like, oh, like weird, and I just think it's a really disgusting effect that it's having on humanity and society, and just the way that we deal with people in public. I don't care for it. I mean, I'm not like a huge fan of like the public or crowds, but I at least go out of my way to be polite to everybody, and that's just kind of going away. And it's not just like I'm losing my personal, security blanket of, the way I deal with people in public with this. It's just that's the way that I've always grown up. You're polite to people in public, and it's the way it's mostly been. Like I could never live in New York City. Like I couldn't deal with people just being that curt with each other all the time. But
yeah,
yeah,
same here.
I feel like it's getting like that. I don't know, man. I mean, I don't like it. Not just a personal, like, again, like aversion. It's just, I don't like the implications that can have. Then it's so easy for, when you're, sitting at home watching TV and you're watching the news and, oh, so-and-so person got, dragged out of their house and locked up for not following whatever rules. And people go, good, good, get them. And it's just like, oh, man, it's just such a disgusting mindset that when you get that detached from people, it's so easy to have. And it's,
yeah, and it's kind of another way of like, it's kind of another way of like dividing and conquering without, even this. I think the 6 feet thing does that too. Is like I guess psychologically it does something too. Like I think the CIA used to use some kind of social distancing as a very effective, like somewhat like torture. I don't know the whole thing about it, but I heard it, and don't quote me on it because I don't actually know, but I do know that social distancing does do something to you psychologically. When you always have to be socially distant and you always have to think about it and stuff, it does something to you psychologically. You're not holding hands with somebody and being a human being. You're just like, oh, you have to stay away from me at all times. So,
that ruins your sense of community, man.
yeah, absolutely. And I kind of want to shift gears and change topics to money real quick, because I think that's something I really want to cover. Is that what else has COVID done to benefit government and these powerful elites? And you always have to follow the money trail. And with these stimulus projects, I think how much money did, and again, I'm not for the stimulus, but I think the slaves getting as much of their own money back as possible is a good thing. I mean, in essence, I think like you're taxed. The average person's like taxed like 60% or maybe even higher, because you're not only paying income tax, but then you're paying sales tax and paying.
And cost of regulations and all the hidden stuff that you can't possibly calculate.
Fuel tax and then what does that do to prices on everything? And then I think if we've got rid of all taxes in general, that everything would drop in price by like at least 85%. And then you've got property taxes and death taxes, and I can go on and on. But how much with the stimulus? It was like very little went to the tax slaves, and most of the money went to, I think everybody in Congress got like a I don't know the exact price, but they got at least like $55,000 a piece as a raise, and it's like, you guys are going to get a raise now, like,
Yeah, I mean, they're earning it.
what
They're
kind of
seeing us through this crisis.
yeah, what kind of stimulus do you guys need? Like, you guys are still working and getting paid by the government, like,
And they
you
still took
know.
their recess.
Yeah, and they still take their recesses, and
even in months amidst this huge tragedy that they're supposedly saving us from, like they're still going to take their recess.
I'm still going to take my vacation, even though, we might be needed and called upon on a job that we're supposedly expected to do, and it's just these people are just horrible, and
there's just so many examples of for rules for thee and not for me kind of thing between I think it was so hilarious, Nancy Pelosi, the hair salon incident. You can look at any of the funerals, of the famous people or the politicians. The regular people aren't allowed to have funerals right now. It was just Fauci in the mask at the baseball game, just all this, all this nonsense where it's just like, obviously they don't believe this stuff, man.
Yeah, you could just tell, and if they do, it's even worse because then they're just complete hypocrites. I mean, but I think kind of like a future that we'll see is like status, or status, like, I think that the elite powerful people will be the ones not wearing masks because they'll be able to afford doctors signing off or doing whatever to say that they don't have COVID and aren't contagious, where I think most people won't be able to afford that, and they'll just have to be masked. And I think it's kind of going to be like a class, some kind of dystopian technocracy where there's these two main classes, the masked slaves and the elite rulers. And
yeah, that's interesting. I haven't quite thought about it like that, but yeah, I could see that's an easy way to determine who's who from a quick glance.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of this is all kind of like a movie almost. It's I even have a hard time watching some movies now because it's like the real world is just so much more interesting than
I'm wondering
watching these thrillers where they just explode cars and shoot stuff all day. It's like, man, it's not even interesting. So
yeah, Michael Bay movies have been not quite as interesting for me since I became an adult, but I was kind of wondering that today. I actually went to a movie theater day. It's like, we go to them anyhow. I think it's been over 3 years, but I got to thinking about it. I'm like, man, like when and if they start making movies again, like, is everybody going to be in a mask like in the movies? Like, is that just going to become to wear out this whole line again? The new normal. I mean, or is that just what it's going to look like? I'm really curious how they're going to play that. I'm curious as to what if anything the election is going to mean for this. Like, I don't think that all this is happening because it's election year. I think that a lot of the hearts and minds of the general people might be influenced by that. People are definitely digging in quite a bit. And I think that might have to do with something with the election. But I don't know. I talked to a lot of people say, "Oh, it's all going to go back to normal when the election happens." And I definitely don't think that's the case. But I'm really curious, and I'd be curious to know what you think, what the outcomes might be depending on who wins. And I know as a Agorist, we don't care much about politics, but it is definitely something that I think is curious as to what might happen if one or the other.
Yeah,
people are going to dig in more or what.
I think there is kind of I think that I can't say that it matters, but I think that it will have some kind of significance and towards how some groups act, right? Like you had during the Obama era, all the there's this anti-war liberal during Bush, and then during Obama it was like, where'd you guys go? You're just Obama bombed more people than Bush did, and you guys are quieter than ever. So I think in terms of a liberty aspect, I think that Trump winning will be worse for the liberty movement than a Biden victory. Just and who knows, right? But and that's just because you'll have all of these gun-toting Republicans who are willing to, if Biden were to do something crazy, they would be like, oh, hell no, let's go grab our guns and whatever. And but if their man Trump is in office, it's like, well, he's just trying to make America great again. Excuse after excuse after excuse. And I think that where's the Tea Party? I mean, there's more spending than ever. You had this this Tea Party during Obama years, quote unquote physically, conservative, and you don't see those people during Trump. So
you're acting like they're consistent. Statists typically aren't that consistent.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like it's like if Trump wins, then there's going to be, I'm confident there's going to be a lot of riots and a lot of turmoil, which could lead to more, push it more in the direction of like a martial law kind of scenario. So that could be unfortunate. I don't know if I share your faith in Republicans. If Biden were to get elected, I feel like there's a lot of talk and they might not actually do anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't have that much. I don't have that much faith in them, but I mean, I just think that I don't want to say that I have that much faith in them because I have like zero faith in the Republicans. But I just feel like they can take more control. I think this is a better way of putting it. They can take more control and do more, implement more of their control agenda with a Republican in office than they could a Democrat. Maybe that's a better way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably true. And again, when one class has the guns, that definitely makes it harder to be rolled on.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if the liberals are against guns, it's like let's move on to something that has really been bothering me, and it's when you talk about anything medically on Twitter, or Facebook, or wherever, it's, well, show me a source, right? And it's like, are these sources like actually like legitimate, right? Like, and in my opinion, I think that most of them are extremely biased. I mean, you've got the World Health Organization getting $36 billion from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The CDC gets $12 million from, and I think John Hopkins gets, a couple million from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So I mean, and then can we trust anything the media says? Well, in my opinion, absolutely not, because it's really just a Soviet style. We really just have a Soviet style propaganda system in terms of our media. Ours is just, better hidden than most. Everyone's like, oh, well, China, all media in China is controlled by the CCP. And it's like, well, all media in the U.S. is controlled by the U.S. government via the CIA. I mean, there's documents proving it. If you look at Operation Mockingbird. So.
Yeah, and it's not even quite. It doesn't even have to be so, for lack of a better term, conspiratorial. It's just the fact that the FCC exists, and you can't have a television station without the government approving you having a television station. I mean, that just means that, of course, if you don't play ball, they can revoke that license. They've given an exemption to the First Amendment when it comes to television and radio. That they do have that control over what you can say. That's why they can censor, speech. You can't curse or whatever on network television. So just the fact that you can't just start a TV or radio station without government approval is like, obviously they have some level of control, if not a ton of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's a great point. And I'm really glad you brought that up because, with that, that's why you don't see any anarchist radio station. There's zero anarchist radio stations. I mean, there's at least a couple million of us out there, I'm sure. So.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist at all. But I mean, Operation Mockingbird was leaked. So I mean, that's.
Oh yeah.
I mean, those are free. I can't remember if that one was leaked or if it was dragged out somehow. But in any case, those documents are free for anybody to look at. And I'm not just blowing smoke up people's asses here. I mean, and I've seen them with my own eyes too. I mean, it's amazing how much control they have, over the media. And I think I can't remember who who exactly, but there are people in the media, news anchors and stuff, who are actual CIA agents. They're CIA first, and then they also went into media.
Yeah, I
And
think Anderson Cooper was one of them.
yeah, Anderson Cooper is for sure CIA. I don't know. I can't think of anybody else offhand, but there's a bunch. There's a bunch of them.
Well, yeah, and then in 2013, Barack Obama signed. Let's see, what's it say here? Signed into law HR 4310, which allegedly legalized the use of propaganda on the U.S. public. That was in the NDAA in 2013. So,
oh yeah, that was like New Year's. I remember. Yeah, the NDAA.
Recent.
That was
let's see what PolitiFact says about it.
Oh God. Well, yeah,
of course.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah, of course. And it's crazy. Not only are these sources for, whether it's media or like all these, medical journals or medical institutions, not only are these sources biased and getting millions and billions from these foundations, but also the fact checkers. The fact checkers are also, I think, PolitiFact. They even get money from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So it's like,
yeah, I think I read that too.
So I mean, and I can't remember if it was PolitiFact or Snopes, but I know that a couple of them get money from different foundations and institutions, and so even these fact checkers are wrong. So it's like when, and I know sources are important, but I mean, when you're trying to talk about this stuff with people, it's like, well, give me a source, and or I remember that I posted something on Facebook when I still had an account with them, and I wasn't terminated with them for being too dank. But somebody was like, "Oh, well, here's a John Hopkins University source that says you're wrong," and I'm like, "Well, John Hopkins, how can you even say that source is unbiased? Because John Hopkins had taken a couple $1 million from Bill and Melinda Gates and a couple of these other foundations. So it's like, how can you say that in and of itself is not biased? Like, you don't know. So I think they've done an extremely great job at controlling the media and the sources and just everything. Fact checkers.
Yeah, any of the big medical associations or medical schools or anything. I mean, if you look into their funding, they're funded by a couple companies. Usually they're big agriculture, big oil, big pharma, stuff like that. So, of course they'll have some sort of agenda, that they're trying to put out there, or they're trying to promote, and there's a lot of different schools of thought and a lot of different medical stuff. I kind of think there might be a little bit of a mix of East and West, as to what's actually the correct thing. And, and even just look at, different opinions of different doctors, and they think different things. So, nothing's set in stone just because, oh, well, this organization says that this is the case, so it must be the truth. A lot of times there's even just more nuance involved. So yeah, who do you really trust? I mean, I think that it comes to reading a lot of different sources and kind of, using your critical thinking skills and figuring out what sounds right. I mean.
Yeah, I mean, and even social media like Facebook and a lot of these other ones are, I mean, they'll censor you. I mean, Agorist Nexus was taken down. Some great guys at Libertarianism were taken down, and I was an admin of that page too. And Capistan, another page that we ran, got taken down. So I mean, and we're anti-government, so of course, Facebook's gonna censor us and take us down. But then they'll leave up, I forget what they left up. They'll leave up something like completely crazy, we're like, what, or I don't know. It's all just extremely frustrating. But
yeah, another couple good examples is any doctor that's come out and said anything against the official narrative has had their videos removed. There were a lot of them on YouTube. And whether or not something like we're talking about, like the pandemic video or whatever, whether or not that's even all like 100% accurate, like why take it down? Like that doesn't make you look right. It makes you look like you're trying to hide something, when you take videos down that, you might not necessarily agree with. But they've been doing, tons of that. And that's anything from anybody saying they might have some sort of treatment for it. or anybody just talking trash about the way that it's being handled. They're actually removing their stuff. So, definitely some shenanigans going on.
For sure. Let's change gears here to, I want to cover the government forcing these businesses to close down because I want to emphasize that this is the government being opportunistic. That is why we have so much chaos. It's not, COVID is not doing all these things. It's government. And when government forces you to close down your business, and there's several different people out there that have tried to remain open, but like that hairdresser, and it was either Seattle or Texas, I can't remember. There's a couple.
Texas, I think it was Dallas, yeah.
Yeah, there's and then I think there's another one in Seattle, I think. And then there was what was it, some bar or I can't remember who on the East Coast up there. So I mean, thing is that even if you want to remain open, that none of this is voluntary. It's all, we're going to force you down because we're going to force you to close because we know what's best for you. And it's well, how can this be what's best for me? The woman in Dallas even said, I'm not sorry for trying to feed my kids. This is not what's best for me.
Right.
And how can the government sit here and say, this is, everybody has to close down. This is what's best for 350 million people. How do you know? How do you know? How do you know that even all this medical stuff is good for 350 million people? That brings me back to vaccines. But go on. Sorry.
Well, so even if they actually believe that, the fucking, I don't know, balls is the right word, but the fucking gall of these people that think, okay, well, what I think is fucking right, I'm going to force it on you because I'm that right. If they actually believe that, how can you possibly be so sure, but that's the whole scientific management thing that sort of came with the progressive era, is that, there's these few people in charge and they know what's best. And, we have to listen to them. And it's really disturbing. And, to your point about the businesses closing, it's not even by their own rules. It's not legal. They don't have the authority to do that, but how much do they care? Obviously they do it anyhow. Now, I have had a little bit of a ray of hope. I was reading some stories where the people who got arrested or fined or whatever, a lot of that stuff's being dropped. I'm pretty confident if you get a ticket or something for not wearing a mask or whatever, I'm pretty confident you'll never actually pay a fine on that, if you fight it. But
right now, I mean, we'll see what happens in a couple of years.
Right now,
I mean,
well, that's the thing, because they can always just change the laws that they're supposed to.
Yeah, exactly.
So in the future, it might not be the case, because then they can just change it, and make it legal for them to shut down businesses.
Yeah, and that goes back to testing their control nets. Okay, a lot of them are doing it, but can we really super enforce it yet? Not yet. Businesses that are not closing, what do they have to do to stay open? They've got to follow all these government guidelines, which, I don't know, you've probably seen quite a bit of that where you're at.
Oh yeah. And, and it's, so we had, I don't know if this was just a Florida thing, but at first they were okay, businesses have to police this, and they have to make this, they have to make their customers do this. And it was a week later, they came out and said, okay, businesses don't have to police it, but they have to put up signs. And they even said, and I think when you're talking about this is a movie, I don't know if you've noticed this where you are, but a lot of times you're walking through a store and the intercom system that's playing music or whatever will come in and be remember to social distance and stay 6 feet apart and blah, blah, blah. And we're all in this together and da, da, da. And then the music goes back to playing. And I was man, that's so that's something from a movie. That's a dystopian, movie thing where they're coming over the intercom to warn you about, the whatever dangerous thing is happening, because things are that bad. But so anyhow, they said that, a lot of places, they just have to put up signs. They don't have to police it anymore because there's fist fights happening, all over the place. And it's man, these minimum wage workers, they're not out there trying to police people. Excuse me, sir, put on your mask. That's not their fucking job, so where does that leave us then as free marketers or agorists? We want to respect a business's property rights. If a business says, hey, I want my customers to wear a mask, then I don't necessarily have a problem with that. And I would want to abide by their rules or not shop there. So I've, places that have asked me to leave, I don't go back to. I've had that Wawa I don't go back to because they would not let me in. Then there's situations like today I was at a work function and we were at a movie theater and they asked me to put on a mask, and because I was there at the work function, I did because, wanted to attend this thing. I didn't really have much of an option at that point, So the way that I kind of look at it is like, okay, government's requiring these businesses to do this. So when I go to a store without a mask, yeah, they have signs, but do I think the businesses really care? Most of the time, probably not. They want me to go in there and shop, but in order, because they want to stay open, so they need to look like, hey, look, we're trying. They want to avoid any possible liability. So, hey, look, we're trying. So it's almost like
the ones that do
really
enforce it are like, okay, I'm not going
right,
to
then, hey, fine. Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to shop there because, I'm like, well, I don't want to, I don't know if violate their property rights is the right way to express that, but not do what they want me to do. But it's almost like, okay, like a head shop, oh, you're not allowed to say the word bong, you have to call it a water pipe, oh, it says for tobacco use only, well, I don't think I'm, violating their, the business's, rights or whatever by actually using that bong for something else. They have to put up those signs. They have to watch what you say in their store so that they can sort of, with a wink and a nod, get by under these government regulations. So, that's just sort of how I look at it. I go in maskless. If they ask me to mask up, then I get to decide how much I really need to go to that establishment, but otherwise I don't necessarily feel bad about, rolling through the grocery store without a mask on. And one of the reasons is that I actually really like to not have one. And because I've talked to friends who are like, well, it's just easier. I just go to the store and I wear one. But I want that person in there who's wearing the mask because, they're supposed to, but they're going, man, this don't feel right. Like, this is fucked up. I shouldn't be doing this. And they see other people without a mask, they're going to be more likely, to shed that thing as well. You know what? The hell with this. I'm not going to wear this mask. I think I brought this up last week with John, but in the Milgram experiment, I'm sure you're familiar with shocking people, basically 1/3 of people will murder you because a person in a lab coat told them to. One of the biggest thing that would have somebody stop the experiment was if they saw somebody else refuse to continue shocking people. They saw someone else say, no, I'm not going to do this. This is nonsense. Almost everybody will then say, no, I'm not going to do this. This is bullshit. This is sick. So I want anybody who might be on that fence to, say, you know what? No, this is fucking nonsense. And I've thought about taking a different tack with wearing a completely ridiculous mask, like a big, like a body shop paint respirator mask. And then people go, okay, that's stupid. This has gone way too far. I'm not doing this anymore.
Right. Yeah. And another thing too is like, what, I think you were saying this earlier, what kind of opportunities have been lost because of all this? You've got to have your employees do all this extra cleaning. You've got to have tape on the floor. You've got to have, maybe, reduce capacity. Maybe reduce
can't function at 25% capacity.
Oh yeah, they can't make enough money, and it's
but how many resources are wasted? How much money are people spending on all this? How many extra man hours? How much? I mean, I'm sure these sanitizing chemicals aren't healthy. How much more of this kind of stuff are we being exposed to? Just sanitizing our world this much isn't healthy for us. I think that hurts our immune system. And that's something that none of the doctors want to talk about, is how to improve your immune system throughout all this.
Yeah, I had a personal experience. I was trying to schedule a dental appointment, and for the first time ever, it was like, oh, well, we're like more than a month out. It's like, man, what happens to these people who maybe have like some dental pain and stuff? Like, what do they do? Because, and I think that all these regulations are actually more unhealthy than COVID itself, in my opinion, because you've got people who can't get dental appointments right away, and they've got to wait extra long, and the dental offices have to follow these regulations, and I think like most of the ones I've seen are like at 50% capacity, and are like a month out in my area. So it's what is this doing to people's health? When they can't get services that they need.
Oh yeah, I'm sure way more people are gonna die because of lack of medical care and supply chain issues with food and stuff like that. Like we'll
Yeah, and
probably be okay here,
suicide.
but third world countries, a lot of people are going to starve to death because of this, and that's that's the kind of thing you have to take into account. It's one of the reasons that it's beneficial to learn economics, because you start looking at the seen versus the unseen, and that's the unseen a lot of times is the more important thing to look at.
Yeah, and my bad too. You were talking about sanitized conditions too, and I really wanted to make sure that we touched up on that. So, I think as a farmer, right? I don't think anybody's like more qualified to go over like sanitized conditions than you are. Go ahead, Dag.
Yeah, and it's funny because there is a little bit of a balance. Let's say the worst possible condition that you could like have. Well, let's take chickens for instance. Like the worst possible condition you could raise a chicken in is like the big industrial chicken houses where they're all packed in, But that's why you have to give them all antibiotics and stuff like that. But a healthy level of exposure is good to build an immune system, and it's something that I see with what I do. So the biggest example that I can give is if when you get a new batch of chickens, you put them in what's called a brooder, and it's they heat lamps in a little place for them to be nice and warm, and raise them up till they get feathers. And let's say it's your first batch of chickens ever, you get them in, you got a brand new, fresh, clean brooder. Chicks are going to die. Okay, and basically what they're doing is they're getting a disease. I cannot pronounce it. I'm sorry. It's called coccidiosis or something. Starts with a C. But they get this disease and they die. So your next batch of chickens, you don't clean that brooder. Like you don't sanitize it. Like it's not full of poop or anything. You clean it up a little bit, but you don't want to sanitize it. When you put that next batch of chicks in there, they're not going to die of that disease because they get inoculated to it because they're exposed. So I
because
think
their immune system's like working and like fighting it off. And...
Right. It's doing what it's supposed to. It's taking, it's evaluating the risks in the environment and building defenses for it, and some chicks might be too weak and might not live even on a good day, but that gets them out of the gene pool. God, I'm not a eugenicist, guys, I swear. But there's there's reasons to some of this stuff. Nature works in a certain way for a certain reason. And that's how we build immune systems. And I've had people argue with me like, oh, you can't build immune systems. That's why we need vaccines. And I'm like, that's nonsense. I see it happen. And that's just how nature works. I mean, if you want your animals to be more prone to sickness, you vaccinate them all. If you live in a place where it's not necessary to do that, which I don't get sick chickens. My chickens live outside. I don't sanitize none of their stuff. They live outside on clean grass. They're not living in their own filth, which is a big thing. But they don't get sick. And I've had customers, when I say don't use antibiotics, customers are like, well, what if they get sick? Use antibiotics? I'm like, no. If they get sick and die, then they don't get bred anymore. Like that doesn't need to be something that's in in the gene pool for them.
Yeah, you're like, I don't want to have to worry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just how nature works, So, it is possible to build immunity. And one thing, this is something that might be kind of controversial, but it's something that I think, and I'm not poo-pooing medical technology, medical advancements, modern medical science. I love it. I would not be alive if it wasn't for it. But I also think that it is a fact that it has made us weaker as a species, over the last, 100 years, because a lot of people who would have been passing on bad genes are still alive because we're able to keep them alive, which is great. But that is something, to recognize, and, that is something to keep in mind with there is a way that nature functions, and we've kind of gotten separated from that in the last 100 or so years. So, it's just important to keep that kind of stuff in mind, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they've even done studies, like they've had like babies and kids like grow up in like extremely sterile, and I think it was like the quintuplets in Canada who like their first however many odd years grew up in like a very sterile environment, and they didn't really do very well health wise. So I think there is something to be said to have kids have their immune system start working and developing at a very young age, so that they're stronger and better off later on. And
oh yeah.
But with that said, I think COVID has just been extremely frustrating to me, because it's like everyone's like, oh, well, let's think of the children. And my issue is that we're forcing these kids, and these are even CDC corrupt numbers that say that kids have like a 0.000 one, like it's so small that it's like 0%. Let's not.
Yeah,
let's
basically
not,
null. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's not fuck around with rounding errors here. Like, let's just call it what it is. It's like 0% that kids under the age of 18 are going to die from COVID, but we're making them mask up. And what really kind of grinds my gears here, not to get Family Guy on you, but is that, if I was like a grandparent or something, and I was even at risk, like I wouldn't want my grandkids to have to like wear masks and stay 6 feet apart and not be kids and not live their lives because, you know, for me, that's just not something that I would want for them. So,
you'd probably want to take the risk and see them.
Exactly. I would even want
what is
to.
life as a grandparent? If you don't get to hang out with your grandkids.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
you're supposed to go 18 months or whatever god awful date they're telling us. That's a large chunk of anybody's life. To give up on the things that make life worth living. But especially when you get to that age, what else do you have? Matlock and your grandkids. That's what you got.
Yeah, right. Well, at first it was 2 weeks, now it's 18 months. Sooner or later it's going to be, 5 years. But
and everything that we talked about earlier about what like this whole the whole masks and just this whole mood that everybody's in. I mean, if that's making us weary of each other or leery of each other and suspicious and stuff like that, I mean, what is that doing to children too? If they're having to go to school and wear masks and behave in all these weird ways, the plexiglass dividers and staggered classes, and I'm not saying that government schools and our Prussian school model is a good thing to begin with. I'm not saying that, but
it was horrible to begin with. Now it's even worse.
If you thought it couldn't get any worse, just wait. Because it definitely is. So.
What does this do to them like psychologically? We don't know, but I do know that it's not. I personally don't think that it's good for kids to behave like this. I want them to be kids, want them to have fun and play with their friends and be able to high five each other and not have to stay 6 feet apart and be in plastic dividers. I think all this is just obey the markings on the floor and watch out for announcements over the loudspeaker, and it's just so Orwellian, man.
Yeah, man, it's regular Prussian school on steroids. It really is. We've been going for a minute here, man. Did you have anything else that we wanted to get in here? I do have one more thing that I want to go over. I don't know if you had anything else.
No, I think that pretty much covers everything I wanted to say. I do got a quote that I want to finish up with, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, one thing that we have to talk about, being the Agorist Nexus podcast, where does this leave Agorist? Or should we be feeling optimistic about the future? Like, is this going to have things maybe collapse? I'm not a classifarian, but you know what I mean? Maybe, help work us out of this. Is this going to open some eyes? I feel like it's definitely entrenching more people into a more status mindset, which is bad, but is this going to help some people wake up? Has the government overstepped in some ways? I'll throw out some girthiness here. It's actually talking to Larkin Rose a few weeks ago, and he's of the mindset that this is a good thing because typically when there's a tragedy or some big thing, there's a power grab and it leaves less freedom for us. But the times when that doesn't seem to be the case, as he says, is when they overstep, and they try and grab too much power at once instead of doing it small and incrementally, then they have, like a revolt or something like that. So I'm kind of curious, as that, like, do you feel like we have anything optimistic to look forward to coming out of this? And then, also how can we as agorists capitalize on this, on this as an opportunity, not just necessarily to make money, but capitalize on this as an opportunity to hopefully bring other people into the fold, open people's eyes, and lessen their statish leanings. I definitely think that there's a lot of opportunity here for people to start providing more things for themselves. And we've just seen the supply chain issues. You don't want to be going to the store and not have meat, toilet paper, all these other things. I think that this might help people be not necessarily doomsday prepperish, but take more responsibility for their lives. I think that's a good thing, and I think that's something that we should all do, more of, and it's definitely lacking these days. But I don't know, man. That's my thoughts. What do you got?
Yeah, I'm definitely hopeful. I mean, 9/11 woke up a lot of people, and then the financial collapse of '08 woke up a lot of people, and I think this is waking up even more people, to be honest. And I've said this before, and I'll probably say it again, but it's kind of like the price control implementation, and that is that, when the government forces like price controls onto people, as in like in terms of like an Austrian economist perspective, you know we know that price controls are extremely bad and lead to shortages, but as an agorist, there's a silver lining there, that when the government does that, they make everybody in that sector essentially a counter economist, because they still have to operate, they still have to try to make money, but tell the government that they're losing money on every transaction. So they make everybody in that sector a counter economist essentially. So what happens when the government tries to implement martial law, or they do something else to try to implement fear, or they try to force people to close down their businesses. They're essentially just creating opponents, and counter economists, because even there have been reported that, some businesses will look like they're closed, but they'll still, they'll still be operating. So that's somewhat of during COVID. So that was something of a small, somewhat counter economy in and of itself. So yeah, I think you and Larkin are exactly right about this thing. That the more control government tries to take, the more pushback, and the more people will be awakened from it.
Yeah, and especially when they make bigger grabs at a single time. It's a frog in the boiling pot kind of thing. You know what I mean? When
yeah, try to boil them,
but
try to throw them in boiling water, he'll jump out. But if you slowly do it, you'll cook him for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Might even beg for it to be a little warmer.
Oh yeah, please.
Oh shit! All right, yeah. I think that's about all I got on this one, man.
Great, man. Yes, yeah. Enjoy the talk, man. As always, thanks for being a great co-host. I'm gonna go over my quote here. End quote. I'm gonna go over kind of two quotes, because he says it two different ways. But the first one is, "In order to taste my cup of water, you must first empty your cup, my friend. Drop all of your preconceived and fixed ideas and be neutral. Do you know why this cup is useful? Because it is empty." Bruce Lee, and like the simplified version that he says is, "Empty your cup so that it may be filled. Become devoid to gain totality." Bruce Lee again. So that's my end quote for today. Agorist Nexus out.